The jungle was wide and deep, and filled with the sound of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees and touched the ground in broken lines of gold. In the middle of this endless green stood a wall of stone, so old that roots had grown into it like veins in an arm. The wall was carved with patterns of suns, moons, and lines that curved like rivers. In the center of this wall, there was a tall stone door, unlike anything else in the jungle. It looked heavy, but it had no handle and no hinges, only a perfect outline that showed where it could open. The carvings on the door were clean, even though the rest of the wall was worn. By time, people in a small village nearby had spoken of this door for as long as anyone could remember. They said it was older than their grandfathers' grandfathers. They said it only opened once every 500 years, and when it did, strange things happened in the sky. Most stayed away from it because they feared what might be behind it. Remy had heard these stories since he was a child, but he never feared the door. He had always been curious and asked questions about where it came from and who built it. When he grew older, he studied history and the old languages of the world. He read about the Mayan people and their skill in reading the stars. He also found strange old notes written by travelers who claimed the door was not made by human hands at all. Now, Remy stood at the edge of the clearing where the door stood. He was not alone. With him were 4 people carrying packs of tools, ropes, and water. They had walked for 2 days through thick forest to reach this place. The air was warm and heavy, but Remy felt a coolness as they stepped into the clearing. The air around the door always felt different, as if the wind here came from somewhere far away. One of the men in the group named Sanu touched the carvings with his hand. He said the stone was smooth like glass in some places. Another person named Mira knelt to look at the base of the door and found small marks in the ground. They looked like lines, but they were too even to be natural. She said they might be part of some kind of track or mechanism. While the others worked, Remy stood still and looked closely at the carvings. There were suns with many rays and moons in different shapes. Between them were lines that curved and crossed in ways that reminded him of the paths of stars in the sky. Some of the symbols he recognized from Mayan calendars, but others were not from any human language. He wondered if they were messages left by someone from far away. A sound came from behind him, and he turned. It was Toma, the old man from the village. Toma had walked all the way here with his cane, and now stood in the sunlight, looking at the door with sad eyes. He told Remy that when the door last opened, many people had gone inside, but none had returned. He said the sky had filled with fire and strange lights, and the river had glowed like silver for 3 nights. He warned Remy that the door might open soon because the air and the animals had grown quiet just as they had long ago. He told Remy to go back before it was too late. Remy listened with respect, but he did not turn away. He said that if the door held danger, it might also hold answers about where humans came from and where they could go. Toma shook his head and said that some answers are heavier than stones and cannot be carried without cost. Then the old man walked back into the trees, leaving the clearing silent again. The team set up camp near the door and began to study it in detail. They used a small brush to clear the dust from the carvings and took careful notes of every shape. As the sun lowered in the sky, they noticed something unusual. The carvings began to glow very faintly with a soft white light. It was not bright enough to see clearly in the day, but as evening came it became easier to notice. The glow seemed to come from within the stone, as if the door was alive. That night, Remy sat by the fire and watched the light from the door through the trees. The others were asleep, but he could not rest. He felt that the door was not just a piece of stone, but a kind of signal, waiting for something. He thought about the 500 years that had passed since it last opened and wondered who or what had the power to keep such tima. Wind moved through the clearing, even though the trees were still. It carried a scent like fresh rain, though the air had been dry for days. Remy stood and stepped closer to the door. The glow in the carvings seemed stronger now, and he thought he could hear a faint hum. It was so soft that he could not tell if it was real or just in his mind. He reached out and touched the stone and felt a cool vibration under his fingers. It was not the feeling of normal rock, but something more like the surface of a machine. When he stepped back, the light faded slightly, as if the door had noticed him. He returned to the fire and sat down, feeling the weight of what was coming. He did not know if the door would open tomorrow or in a week, but he felt sure that it would open soon, and when it did, he would be here to see what lay beyond. The jungle was quiet all around him. The night sky above was filled with stars, and the moon was bright. Somewhere far away, an owl called, but in the clearing, there was only the faint glow of the carvings. It was a reminder that something ancient and patient was waiting, and that soon the waiting would end. Morning light poured into the clearing as the first rays of the sun touched the carvings on the stone door. The soft glow that had shone during the night faded, but the carvings still seemed to hold a quiet life of their own. The air was cooler here than in the rest of the jungle, and the team felt it as they stepped out of their tents. Ramai walked toward the door and stood before it. With his notebook in hand, he traced each carving with his eyes, trying to remember every line and curve. Sana came beside him and pointed to a set of 3 small suns carved in a row. He said they matched a pattern in the sky he had once seen on a star chart. Mira joined them, carrying a folded paper, and laid it flat on a smooth stone. It showed a drawing she had made the night before of the door's carvings. She said the 3 suns aligned with a group of stars that would soon rise together in the same part of the sky. If that was true, it could mean the door was built to open when that alignment happened. Before they could discuss further, a sound came from the trees. It was the slow, steady tapping of a cane against the ground. Toma, the old villager, stepped into the clearing, his face lined with age, but his eyes bright and steady. He looked at the door for a long time without speaking, then turned to Remai. He said he had dreamed of the door again in the night. In his dream, the carvings burned with light so bright it lit the jungle like day. He said he had seen shadows moving inside the doorway, but they were not people. He could not say what they were, only that they moved with purpose and looked at him as if they knew his name. When he woke, he felt he had to come back and give his warning once more. Remai listened carefully. Toma told him that 500 years ago, when the door last opened, the people of the village had been curious too. They had sent 12 men and women inside to see what was there. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then lights appeared in the night sky. They were not like stars or the moon. They moved quickly and left trails of silver that shimmered in the darkness. On the 4th night, the river glowed as if moonlight was trapped in its water. The elders said it was a sign that the earth had been touched by something from far away. After that, the people who had gone inside never returned. The door closed, and no one saw it open again. Toma's voice grew softer as he told this. He said he was not asking Remai to stop because he feared for the door or for the jungle. He was asking because he feared what could happen if the door was opened before the world was ready. He said some doors do not lead to a place, but to a path that cannot be walked back. Once taken, it changes the people who walk it, and also changes the place they leave behind. The team was quiet. The wind moved through the trees, and the leaves whispered like soft voices. Ramai thanked Toma for sharing his story, and said he understood his concern. But he also said the world was already changing in many ways. He believed it was better to meet what lay ahead with open eyes than to hide from it. Toma sighed and looked at the carvings once more. He touched one of the moons with his fingertips and said the stone felt colder than the air. He said the cold was not from the night but from something beyond. Then he turned and slowly walked back into the forest. His cane tapped against the roots and stones until the sound was gone. The rest of the day, the team worked to study the carvings. They noticed small details they had missed before. Some of the lines were too precise to be made with simple tools. The curves were perfect, and even under the closest look, it was as if the stone had been shaped by something that did not use hands at all. In the afternoon, the air in the clearing grew heavy and still. The sound of birds faded until the jungle felt empty. Sanu looked up and saw that the clouds were gathering, but they were moving in an unusual way. Instead of drifting across the sky, they seemed to form a slow spiral above the clearing. Mira took out a small device to measure the air and found a faint vibration in the ground. It was so small they could barely feel it, but it was steady like the beat of a heart. Ramai stood in front of the door again. He watched the carvings and saw a faint shimmer moving along the lines like water running in a channel. He wondered if the door was measuring the movement of the planets and the stars. He thought of what Myra had said about the 3 suns in her drawing and realized the alignment might be very near, perhaps only a day or two away. That evening, as the sun set, the glow in the carvings returned. It was brighter than the night before, and each symbol seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The light was soft, yet strong enough to make the clearing shine. The team gathered around the fire and spoke in low voices. They agreed to stay until the alignment happened. They would be ready when the door opened. Ramai looked toward the forest and thought of Toma. He wondered if the old man would watch from a distance when the time came. He also wondered about the people who had gone through the door 5 centuries ago. Where had they gone? Had they found another place or another world? Had they wanted to return but could not? The night grew quiet again. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was waiting for something. Far above, the stars moved slowly across the sky. 3 of them shone a little brighter than the rest. Ramai noticed them and felt certain they were the same 3 suns carved into the door. He closed his notebook and knew that whatever happened next would be unlike anything they had ever known. The morning began with a thin mist over the clearing. It curled around the trunks of the tall trees and drifted across the grass in front of the stone door. The carvings on the door were still glowing faintly, even in the daylight. The glow no longer faded fully when the sun rose, which made Ramai certain the time of opening was near. Myra was already awake and sitting near the base of the wall with her papers spread out in front of her. She had spent most of the night matching the shapes on the door with the positions of the stars in the sky. When Ramai joined her, she pointed to a circle on the paper. She said the 3 suns and a half moon carved on the top part of the door matched the sky exactly as it would appear the next evening. If that was correct, the door might open in less than 2 days. Sanu and the others unpacked more equipment from their bags. They had small cameras and measuring tools that they placed at different spots around the clearing. They wanted to record everything, from the first sign of movement to whatever might lie beyond the opening. Every step they took was careful because the ground here felt different from the rest of the jungle. It was firm, but not in the way of normal soil. It felt as if there was something solid lying beneath the grass. By midday, the mist had lifted, and the sky above the clearing had taken on a deeper shade of blue. The air was still but warm and heavy. There were no bird calls or the usual chatter of the forest. It was as if the animals had decided to leave this place until the strange energy had passed. Ramai stood in front of the door again. He had been watching it every hour and noticed that the glow was now following a slow pattern. First the suns would brighten, then the moons, then the long curved lines between them. The light would move along the carvings as if it was telling a story in a language they could not yet understand. Mira joined him and said it felt like the door was awake and preparing for something. She said it was like watching a clock that counted not seconds but centuries. Ramai agreed and told her the alignment in the sky was probably the final key. Once the stars and planets reached the right position, the door might unlock on its own. That afternoon, the ground began to hum faintly again, just like the day before. This time, it was stronger and could be felt through their boots. The sound was not loud, but it seemed to reach into the chest and match the beat of a slow and steady heart. Sanu placed a small device against the stone wall and said the vibration was coming from inside. Whatever was behind the door was not silent, and still it was alive in some way, as The sun lowered in the sky. The clouds formed into long, thin shapes that stretched toward the horizon. The light turned golden and made the carvings shine brighter. The team stopped their work and watched as the glow pulsed with the rhythm of the earth's quiet hum. It felt as if the door was breathing. With them, that night they built a small fire, but no one felt like sleeping. They sat in a circle and shared their thoughts. One of the younger team members, named Dari, asked what they would do if the door opened to a place they could not return from. No one answered right away. Rami finally said that sometimes discovery meant walking into the unknown without a promise of return. He reminded them that humanity had crossed oceans and deserts in the past without knowing what was on the other side. This was just another ocean, but made of time and distance instead of water. When the night deepened, they all looked toward the stars. The 3 bright suns that Mira had marked were rising higher. A thin crescent moon moved slowly toward them. Mira whispered that by tomorrow night the alignment would be perfect. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with a mix of fear and excitement. The carvings on the door were now glowing so strongly that the clearing seemed lit by a pale white lantern. The light shifted along the lines and shapes, as if tracing paths in the sky. Sometimes the glow would pause on a single carving and pulse several times before moving on. Rami thought it might be a signal or a kind of preparation sequence. If the door truly came from somewhere beyond Earth, then maybe it was following rules set by its makers long ago. Ere midnight, a new sound joined the hum. It was faint but clear, like the soft ringing of glass when touched by a finger. The sound came in waves, each one lasting a few seconds. It echoed through the air and seemed to make the trees tremble. The fire flickered, as if the air itself was moving in response. No one spoke for a long time. They simply watched the door and listened to the strange ringing. It was both beautiful and unsettling. The sound felt older than the jungle, older than the stones, and perhaps older than humankind itself. When the first light of dawn touched the clearing, the ringing stopped, but the hum remained. The glow of the carvings did not fade this time. They stayed bright even under the full strength of the morning sun. It was as if the door no longer cared about the day or night cycle. It was fixed now on a single goal, and that goal was approaching fast. Rami told the team to rest while they could, because the next night would likely bring the opening. He walked to the edge of the clearing and looked toward the forest. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure watching from the shadows. It was tall and still and did not move like a person. But when he blinked, the figure was gone and the trees stood silent again. He said nothing to the others, but made a note in his book. All through the day they stayed near the clearing. They checked their cameras and tested their lights, but most of their focus stayed on the door. It felt less like a piece of stone and more like a living thing that was gathering strength. The pulsing light moved faster now, almost like a heartbeat that had quickened with anticipation. By sunset, the sky was clear. The 3 suns shone in the east, and the crescent moon had nearly reached its place among them. The air grew cooler, and the wind from the forest carried a faint metallic scent. The team gathered their packs and stood ready. They knew that when the alignment came, the door would no longer wait. It would open, and whatever lay beyond would reveal itself to those who had chosen to be here. The sky was clear and deep blue when the sun began to sink toward the horizon. The air felt different in the clearing, as if the space around the stone door was holding its breath. Rami stood with his team in a half circle facing the wall. The 3 bright suns in the sky had climbed higher through the day, and now the thin crescent moon was sliding into place beside them. Mira checked her notes again and whispered that in less than an hour, the alignment would be perfect. The glow on the carvings had grown so strong that the patterns could be seen from far through the trees. Each symbol pulsed with light, and the lines between them flowed like rivers of pale fire. The hum in the ground was stronger now and could be felt in the solace of their feet. It was no longer a soft beat, but a steady, deep vibration, like the turning of some hidden wheel far below the Ursanu. was kneeling near the base of the door, watching for movement. He said the light seemed to be sinking deeper into the stone. As if it was being absorbed, Ramai thought that maybe the door was drawing power from the sky through the carvings. If the builders had made it to open only when the planets and stars aligned, then perhaps this was the final step in its long wait. The jungle around them stayed silent. No bird called, no insect buzzed. Even the leaves of the trees did not move, though no one could feel a breeze. It was as if every living thing nearby had paused to see what was about to happen. The sun dropped lower, and the sky turned a soft gold, then a pale orange. The three bright suns above began to shine in unison with the thin moon beside them. The moment the alignment was complete, a sudden change swept through the clearing. The light on the carvings flared, so bright that the team had to raise their hands to shield their eyes. The hum rose into a deep, clear tone that seemed to pass through their bodies. Like a wave, the door began to move without a sound. There was no grinding, no creak of stone against stone. It simply slid inward as if it weighed nothing. A thin line of light appeared along its edges and grew wider as the stone shifted. The light was not the color of the sun, but a pale silver with a hint of blue. It did not spill outward like fire, but poured forward in a soft, steady glow that touched the grass and the trees without casting shadows. Raymay took a slow step forward. Beyond the opening, he could see a tunnel, but it was not made of stone. Its walls were smooth and shone like polished metal, yet they seemed warm and alive. The air coming from inside was cool and carried a faint scent like fresh rain on dry soil. It felt clean in a way the jungle air never did. The rest of the team followed him to the edge of the doorway. They could see that the tunnel was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. It sloped gently downward and seemed to stretch far beyond their sight. The light inside had no clear source, as Bush, if it came from the walls themselves. There were no lamps, no flames, and no shadows. Myra knelt at the threshold and touched the floor of the tunnel. She said it felt like stone at first, but then as if it softened slightly under her fingers. Sanu held up a small instrument and measured the air. He said it was the same temperature as the clearing, but held a higher level of oxygen. Raymay thought about what that could mean, but kept his thoughts to himself. They all turned as a sudden voice came from the trees. It was Toma. The old man had returned, and now stood just outside the clearing, watching the door with wide eyes. He told them in a steady voice that this was the site his grandfather had described to him, the same pale light, the same silent opening. He said that once they stepped inside, the path would be theirs alone, and the door would close until another 5 centuries passed. Ramay nodded and thanked him. Toma looked at each of them, and then at Ramay again, as if trying to remember every detail of their faces. Finally, he stepped back into the shadows of the forest and was gone. The hum in the ground began to fade, but the light in the tunnel stayed steady. The door stood open at its full width now, and the team could feel the cool air moving gently around them. They glanced at each other without speaking. Each of them knew that crossing the threshold meant entering a place that might not allow return. But none of them stepped back. Ramay adjusted the strap of his pack and took one more look at the jungle. The clearing seemed unchanged, but he knew it would never feel the same again. He turned toward the opening and stepped inside. The floor was smooth and silent under his boots. The air felt easier to breathe, as if his lungs could hold more of it with less effort. The others followed close behind. As they moved deeper, the hum was replaced by a faint, distant tone like music carried on a far wind. It rose and fell gently, and seemed to match the rhythm of their steps. The tunnel curved slightly, and the view behind them narrowed until the clearing was only a small square of green and gold light. After a few minutes, they reached a wider space. The walls here were taller and shaped into long flowing curves that met high above their heads. The light was brighter and showed patterns on the walls that looked like constellations. Myra stopped and pointed. She recognized several of the star patterns from the carvings on the stone door. Ramai realized they were standing in a map of the night sky. For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply looked around and tried to take in the size and detail of the chamber. Then a soft sound came from deeper ahead. It was not the hum they had heard before, but something like a voice. It was not speaking in any language they knew, but it was clear and calm and carried a sense of welcome. Team exchanged glances. They had crossed the point where the jungle could still be seen. Now there was only the path forward into the heart of the unknown, and somewhere in the distance, the unseen voice was waiting for them to come closer. The tunnel widened with each step they took. The air remained cool and carried the same faint scent of rain and fresh stone. The walls seemed to change as they walked. At first they were smooth like polished metal, but now faint lines and shapes began to appear on their surface. These shapes shifted and moved like mist in a breeze. Sometimes they looked like mountains, sometimes like rivers, sometimes like the curve of a face. The sound they had heard earlier grew clearer. It was not a single voice, but many soft voices layered together like a distant choir. None of the words could be understood, yet the tone felt calm and steady. It was like listening to a story told in a language the heart could understand, even if the mind could not. Remy walked at the front with Myra just behind him. He noticed that the tunnel ahead was growing brighter. The light seemed to come from beyond a wide archway that was slowly taking shape before them. The arch was higher than any doorway they had seen, and its frame was covered in markings like those on the stone door outside. The glow from within the arch was warm and pale, almost like the color of early morning sunlight. When they stepped through the arch, they stopped in awe. They had entered a vast hall so large that its ceiling was lost in a soft haze of light. The floor was smooth and dark, but reflected their shapes like water. Tall pillars lined both sides of the hall. Each pillar was carved from a single piece of stone, or perhaps some material that looked like stone yet had no cracks or seams. The most striking thing about the pillars was that each one displayed moving images. They were not flat like pictures, but seemed to hold depth, as if each pillar was a window into another time. The first pillar showed a wide open plain with people walking across it in groups. They wore simple clothes made of woven grass and carried spears. In the distance, a strange object hovered in the air like a silver shell. From its stepped tall figures who handed the people tools and seeds. Mira gasped and said it looked like the early days of farming. Sanu moved to the next pillar. It showed a great city of stone rising under the guidance of the same tall figures. The people worked side by side with them, building walls and towers that reached high into the sky. The scene changed slowly to show ships sailing on wide seas, with stars mapped carefully on large cloth charts. Rame walked from one pillar to another. Each one seemed to hold a chapter of human history. Some showed times of learning, when people built great libraries. Others showed times of travel, when they crossed deserts and mountains. In every scene, the tall figures appeared again and again. Sometimes they stood beside leaders, sometimes they taught children. Always they were there in the background, guiding without forcing. The voices that had been soft before now filled the hall more clearly. It was as if the pillars themselves were speaking, though the words were still unknown. The tone carried meaning. It felt like patience and watchfulness. It felt like a reminder that the journey of humankind had never been taken alone. At the far end of the hall, a raised platform held a single large structure. It was shaped like a sphere and floated slightly above the floor. Its surface shifted between patterns of stars and gentle waves of light. As they approached it, the voices grew into a single clear tone. The tone seemed to pause, waiting for them to come closer. Ramai stepped forward until he stood only a short distance from the sphere. The light from it washed over his face, and he felt a strange warmth, not on his skin but deep inside. It was as if the light was looking through him rather than at him. Then the voices joined into one and spoke in clear human language, though the accent was unlike any he had heard it. Said that humankind had been guided and watched from its first steps into the open plains. It said the tall figures were travelers from a far place who had chosen to help young civilizations grow without falling into ruin. It said the door in the jungle was one of many placed around the world. Each door opened only when a certain time had passed and the stars had reached a certain place. It said the opening of the door was an invitation. The voice did not speak of demands or orders. Instead, it spoke of choice. It told them that humankind could now take a path that would lead beyond the world to join others who traveled between the stars. But it also said the choice was not to be made lightly. Those who stepped forward would not return to the lives they knew. The path ahead was long and would change them in ways they could not yet imagine. The light of the sphere grew softer as if waiting for their thoughts. Remai turned to the others and saw a mix of wonder and unease in their faces. Myra's eyes shone with curiosity, while Sanu looked at the floor deep in thought. Dari's hands were clasped tightly, as if holding on to the familiar in the middle of something vast and strange. Remai looked back at the pillars. He thought of the scenes of early farmers learning to plant seeds, of sailors crossing oceans guided by stars, of builders raising towers that touched the clouds. He realized that humankind had always moved forward by stepping into the unknown. The difference now was only in the distance, and at the scale the hall seemed to wait without pressure. The light was steady, the voices quiet again. It felt as if they could stand here for hours, and the invitation would still be open. But Remai knew that once the door behind them closed, it would not open again for many lifetimes. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the platform, the floor beneath. His feet was warm as if lit from within. He stood before the sphere and felt the quiet strength in its presence. He said in a calm voice that humankind would take the path offered, that they would learn and travel and carry the story of their world to others among the stars. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the sphere brightened and the pillars across the hall flared with light. The images on them flowed together into one vast scene of a sky filled with countless points of light. The stars seemed to move, drawing lines between them until they formed a great map of the galaxy. The voice returned and said the path was open. It said they would be carried beyond their home to where others waited to greet them. It said the door would close behind them until the time came for a new generation to make the choice again. The light from the sphere reached out and touched Ramai's hands like a warm wind. It felt like both a welcome and a beginning. The team stood together, knowing they were no longer just explorers of the jungle. They were the first of their kind to answer the call of the Mayan door. The hall was quiet again after the light of the sphere faded to a soft glow. The team stood close together on the smooth, dark floor. They could still see the vast map of the stars floating in the air above the pillars. The lines between the stars seemed to breathe with a gentle rhythm as if they were alive. Ramai looked at the others. No one spoke for a long moment. It was clear they all felt the weight of the decision. This was not like choosing a new path on a map of the jungle. It was choosing to step away from the world they had known since birth. The voice of the sphere returned, though softer than before. It said the door outside would remain open until the sun reached its highest point the next day. Then it would close for 500 years. It said they could return to their home and carry the memory of this place, where they could remain and take the path beyond. There was no shame in turning back. The choice belonged to them alone. Myra stepped forward and asked if they would ever be able to see Earth again if they chose to leave. The voice answered that they might one day return, but not as they were now. Time and distance would pass differently beyond the stars. When they returned, the world might not remember them, and the people they knew would be long gone. Sanu rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm them. He said he had dreamed since childhood of visiting other worlds, but he also thought of his family back home. He said the idea of leaving forever felt heavier than any journey he had imagined. Dari sat on the floor with her arms around her knees. She looked at the pillars showing the scenes of human history and said she had always wondered if humans were. Alone now, she knew the answer, and it made her want to see what else was waiting beyond. She said her fear was still there, but her curiosity was stronger. Remy listened to all of them without interrupting. He thought about Toma in the forest and the warning he had given. He thought of the long silence between the last opening of the door and this one. The people who had walked through before had never come back. Maybe they had found a place they wanted to stay. Maybe the journey had taken them farther than even this hall could show. He walked slowly toward the sphere again. The floor felt warm beneath his boots as it had before. He stood close enough to see the faint swirling patterns within its surface. They were not random shapes, but maps of places he did not recognize. Some showed seas and islands under strange colored skies. Others showed cities of tall silver towers surrounded by green fields. The voice spoke again. It said that the journey ahead was not only travel through space, but also a path of learning the travelers who chose. This path would be given knowledge of other worlds. They would see how different civilizations lived and how they shaped their homes. They would also be asked to share what it meant to be human, so that the others might learn in return. Myra came to stand beside Remy. She said she was ready to leave. Her voice was steady and her eyes fixed on the map of stars above. She said she did not want to watch the door close without knowing what was beyond it. Sano stepped forward, slowly. He said he could not turn back either. Even if the journey was long and hard, he wanted to be part of something that would not happen again for many lifetimes. Dari stood last. She did not speak at first, but walked to the edge of the platform and looked back at the archway that led to the tunnel. Beyond it, she could see only a faint glow from the jungle. She said she had loved her home, but she believed the story of humankind would not end there. Then she turned back toward the sphere. Remy looked at each of them and saw the same quiet resolve in their faces. The choice had been made not in one moment, but over the hours and days they had spent here. The door had called to them long before it began to open. Now they were ready to answer. He faced the sphere and said in a clear voice that they chose to take the path. He said they accepted the journey and would carry the story of Earth to the worlds beyond. The sphere brightened in response. The pillars flared with light once more, and the images of human history began to flow upward into the star map above. It was as if their past was joining with the map of the future. The voice said the path was prepared. It told them to follow the light to the place where the journey would begin. It said they would be received as travelers and teachers among those who waited. A wide passage opened in the far wall of the hall. It led into a space filled with a soft golden light that seemed to stretch endlessly forward. The air from the passage felt warmer and carried a scent unlike anything from Earth. It was sweet, yet fresh, and made them think of new beginnings. Remy turned once more toward the archway that led back to the jungle. He imagined the door slowly closing the way it had for the generations before. He thought of Toma standing in the shadows of the forest and wondered if he would see the light of the door fade one last time. Then he turned away from it and faced the golden passage. The team stepped forward together there. Footsteps made no sound on the smooth floor. As they walked, the light around them grew warmer and brighter until it was all they could see. The voices of the hall faded into silence, but the sense of welcome remained somewhere ahead beyond the light. Was the first step into the greater world the sphere had spoken of. They did not know what waited, but they knew they would face it together. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. The golden light surrounded them as they walked forward. It was warm but not hot, and it felt almost like a gentle hand guiding them. The passage they followed was wide and smooth, with walls that seemed to shine from within. The light grew softer as they went deeper, until it looked like the glow of dawn over a calm sea. They walked for what felt like a long time, though. There was no way to measure it. There were no shadows and no sign of day or night. The air was easy to breathe and carried That same fresh scent that made them think of new beginnings. The hum they had felt earlier was gone, but there was a soft rhythm in the floor under their feet. Like a slow heartbeat, at last the passage opened into a round chamber. The ceiling here was a great dome filled with moving patterns of stars. They shifted and turned as if showing the path to places far away. In the center of the chamber stood a platform shaped like a wide ring. Inside the ring was a space filled not with air, but with a shimmering surface that looked like liquid silver. The sphere's voice filled the chamber without echo. It said the silver surface was the bridge between worlds. It would carry them to a place among the stars where they would meet others who had once stood before a door like theirs. The voice told them they were ready to begin, and that the journey would take no time at all to them. But far more time would pass in the world they left behind. Ramai stepped closer to the ring and looked into the silver. He could see faint shapes moving far below its surface. They looked like cities shining in colors he had never seen on Earth. He felt a pull in his chest, not of fear, but of longing to know what those places were like. Myra smiled faintly and said this was the moment they had been walking toward since the jungle. Sano ran his hand along the smooth edge of the platform and said it felt alive. Dari stood with her eyes fixed on the silver surface, as if she was already seeing the other side. The voice told them that once they stepped through the bridge, the door in the jungle would begin to close. It would seal again for 500 years, until another time when the stars aligned. It said the jungle would remain as it had been, and the clearing would be quiet once more. Only the memory of the light would remain for those who happened to see it. Ramai thought of Toma again. He imagined the old man standing in the shadows, watching the glow fade into darkness. He hoped Toma would know that the travelers had gone willingly, and with hope in their hearts, one by one they stepped onto the ring. The moment their feet touched it, the silver surface rose slightly as if greeting them. The air around them felt lighter, as though they were standing on the edge of the sky itself. Ramai took the first step into the silver. It was neither solid nor liquid. It felt like walking through a soft wind that wrapped around him without resistance. The light grew brighter and warmer until it filled his vision completely. Behind them, the chamber grew quiet. The sphere's voice spoke one last time, saying the journey had begun. The silver light then closed gently over the ring, and the platform was empty once more. Far away in the jungle, the stone door began to move. At first, the line of light along its edges grew thinner as the heavy slab slid outward. The glow of the carvings faded slowly until they looked like plain weathered markings again. The hum in the ground lessened until it was gone. The air in the clearing grew still and warm as before. Toma stood at the edge of the trees, watching. He had walked quietly to the clearing when he saw the sky change above it. Now he saw the last pale light vanish into the seams of the stone. He knew the door had closed and would not open again for many lifetimes. He whispered a farewell, though he did not know if those who had passed through could hear him. The jungle around the clearing came alive again. Birds called in. The trees' leaves moved with the wind. It was as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Yet Toma knew the truth. The clearing had seen the passing of travelers from Earth to the far reaches of the stars. It would stand silent again until the time came for the next calling. High above in the sky, a new point of light appeared. It was brighter than the stars around it, and it moved slowly across the darkness. It was not a comet, and it was not a wandering planet. It was the vessel that now carried Rami and his team away from Earth. Inside that vessel, the team stood together, looking out at a view no human eyes had seen before. The planet they had called home was below them, round and blue with swirls of white cloud. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction. They could feel the steady movement carrying them toward the places they had seen in the silver. Ramai placed his hand against the smooth wall beside him and felt the gentle hum of the vessel. He looked at Mirasano and Dari and saw the same quiet wonder in their faces. They were not afraid. They were ready for what waited ahead. The vessel turned and the earth slowly fell behind. In its place, the star map of the galaxy unfolded before them in real light and distance. The journey had begun not just for them, but for humankind. The Mayan door had opened and its travelers had answered, far below in the quiet jungle. The stone wall stood still among the vines and roots. Its carvings were dark and silent, but they held the memory of light. The clearing would keep its secret until the stars called again. And when that day came, another group would stand before the door feeling the same pull toward the unknown. For now the story of the Mayan door had moved beyond Earth. It was carried among the stars by the first travelers, who had chosen to step through their path, knew their destination unknown, but their choice was clear. They had left the world they knew to join the greater journey waiting in the endless sky.